How do you think on your feet and speak articulately on any topic? When I speak, I notice that my communication is not very consistent. Sometimes I can just get into a flow, while other times I'm struggling to structure my thinking. And so my communication is all scattered. But what if there are some daily exercises that you can do to ensure consistency in your communication? To think fast and speak on any topic with maximum clarity. Let's get into it. We're going to understand why do we blank out while speaking, a framework that allows you to think on your feet and articulate any narrative, and a daily exercise to practice this framework. Now, what we're about to discuss has not only helped me become more consistent in my communication, but students from across the world who've trained with us have had similar results. So let's get into it. And by the way, if you're new here, my name is Pradeep from Frantically Speaking. If you want to enhance your communication skills, hit subscribe because we release content around this topic all the time. And if you want to take your communications journey to the next level, you can book a free consultation call with us by clicking on the Calendly link given in the description below. You can talk to us and see if we can work together. On to the video. So the first thing we need to understand is, why do we blank out while speaking?
A lot of us tend to have a challenge that when we are put on the spot, we feel that our communication is a little scattered. It's not coming out in a structured manner. We struggle with sentence structuring, speaking in a flow. And overall, after we walk away from that meeting, conversation, presentation, we just feel, man, I think I could have done this more effectively. So to understand the solution, we need to understand, why does this happen in the first place? Now, if you ask yourself this question that, hey, why do I blank out? Why can't I speak in a flow, especially when I'm under pressure? A lot of answers revolve around things like, oh, I'm nervous, I'm not sure what to say, I don't have the right vocabulary. But what I would urge you to do is to go one level deeper and ask yourself, why is it that you feel that way? Why do you feel nervous? Why do you feel like you can't find the right words? And the reason I tell you to do this mental exercise is because the more you go deeper and deeper, you'll find the reason being something very evolutionary, something very human. And before I tell you what that particular aspect is, to understand it on a deeper context, we need to understand that when we were back in our primitive times as humans, so when we were hunter and gatherers, and imagine if you're a hunter, you walk out into the forest, you see a lion in front of you. Now, when you see a lion, you have only one of two options. You can either run away, or you can fight the lion with your bow and arrow, your sticks, or your hands, whatever you have in that moment. So those are the only two options available. Otherwise, you're at the mercy of the lion, whether it'll eat you or not. That is known as the fight or flight response, which is something that also has the answer to why we blank out in our corporate environments. But what is the connection between the hunter in front of a lion and us in front of our bosses? The fight or flight response, as I said earlier, is a very evolutionary concept. It's something that's inbuilt in us because it's a surviving mechanism. It's there in us whether we want it or not. So when our boss is in front of us, of course, our physical aspect is not in any form of danger. So why does fight or flight kick in a meeting room, for instance? Well, we need to change fight or flight, those words, up into two different words, which are speak or freeze. When we are put on the spot, we can either speak or we tend to freeze up. And when I say speak, I mean we don't tend to speak even in the most fluent way, but we tend to just speak in a fumbled manner. Or we blank out, and hence we move on or flight from that conversation. And hence we move on or flee from that conversation. And this tends to happen because of something known as the death of the ego. And when I say death of the ego, I don't mean permanent death. It's more of a temporary death. In the lion example, you were put in physical danger, and hence the fight or flight response kicked in. In a corporate setting, when our colleagues are in front of us and we're not able to answer a question effectively, or we blank out during a presentation, or we are just not communicating effectively, we are reducing our impression in front of other people. And that fear of judgment is what brings across the death of the ego in that moment. That is where the speak or freeze response takes place. Now, in those moments, what we need to understand is, how do we control the freeze response? And in those moments, we need to understand that when we feel this speak or freeze response, it's something very involuntary that our body does. And we shouldn't judge ourselves to have this particular response. A lot of us feel that, oh, why am I nervous? Why am I feeling like this? And we spiral downwards and hence can't communicate effectively, even though we have the right answers. But we have to understand that this is an involuntary action by our body. Instead, we need to shift our focus from overcoming this response towards learning how to control it effectively. Because the more we control it, the more effectively and the more calmly we can respond in a high pressured environment, even if you're not prepared to speak.
So after we've understood why do we blank out, we need to understand how do we control our thinking so that we don't speak in a scattered manner. That's where frameworks become really important. Now, one of the most common frameworks you can learn is called as Sprep. It stands for point, reason, example, and point again. It simply means when you're asked a question, you respond with the point, you give a reason, follow it up with an example, and then end with the point again. Here's a simple example.
Now, if you're asked a question which is, hey, what's your favorite book to read? In these occasions, what would you say? Most of us would say, hey, my favorite book is Think and Grow Rich. Yeah, what's yours? And the conversation kind of just ends over there itself. But when we use Sprep, we're able to have a much more articulated response. For instance, we can say, my favorite book is known as Super Communicators. The reason I feel this way is because this book teaches you certain fundamental aspects of communication which aren't taught anywhere else. I'll give you a quick example. When I have a conversation, I find it difficult to end a conversation, although I can initiate and maintain it. The book has an awesome technique which says that if you're trying to end a conversation, most of us just end by saying, hey, so great catching up, but I got to go now. And it kind of feels awkward and it reduces the value of whatever was said beforehand. The technique the book provides is this, that when you're about to end a conversation, preempt that you're about to end it, ask one final question, and then end it. It could go something like this. I'm having a conversation and I say, hey, great catching up with you. I got to head, but just tell me one thing. Do you come around here often? Oh, only on Thursdays. Awesome. Nice to catch up with you. Hopefully I'll catch you next Thursday as well. Okay, see you. And then we end. And that is why, because of the practical advice it offers, Super Communicators is one of my favorite books to read.
But Prep isn't the only framework. In fact, in a casual setting, you want to avoid just being too direct with your points, and you want to draw more of a narrative, provide some context, and then dive into your answer, reasonings, and examples. That's where a different framework can come in, which tends to lean away from the simplicity of Prep. And that framework is called CARE. And here's an explanation for that.
This framework is called as CARE. And CARE is a framework that we need to use when we can't get to the point very directly. For example, when one of my friends was having a conversation with me and she was very upset. She was talking about the fact that I am not reaching anywhere with my career. I'm feeling very left behind, and all my friends are being taken ahead of me. And if I have to respond back to her, I cannot use the Prep framework over there. I can't say, hey, you need to be more patient. Everyone's on their own path, right? So, because it'll help you to get to a particular place faster, but just take your own time. I can't do that because it's not going to have the same impact. People already know these generic advice points. But if I use the CARE framework, I can frame it in a much more convincing fashion. I can first draw context through storytelling. So here's the actual answer that I gave to my friend at that moment and how I used CARE. So she told me the entire thing that, hey, I'm feeling left behind. I feel all my friends are passing me forward in their careers. And I'm feeling very lost and sad about this whole thing. Now, after listening to her, I immediately started off with a story. My brother used to be a super smart person, always getting the best marks in exams, always exceeding in everyone's expectations. But he had a friend called Raj. And Raj wasn't the smartest person in the room. In fact, when they were in college, they both started studying to become chartered accountants. And even through repeated attempts, Raj just never made it through. My brother, on the other hand, made it through in just one attempt itself, which is super difficult to do. Eventually, they did get placed in the same company for their first job. But because my brother was a chartered accountant, he was getting paid 2.5 times higher than Raj, even though they were the same age working at the same company. But both of them had this bug of entrepreneurship. They wanted to do their own things. They didn't want to be stuck to a job. And about 18 months after getting placed, they left that job and they decided to start their own ventures separately. My brother started an education business. Raj started something in transportation. My brother's company went on to become a big company. It's being valued at about $5 million. It's doing more than $1 million in revenue. It's very profitable, and it's a nice company with a great solid business. Raj's company, on the other hand, is valued at more than $100 million. My point is that no matter how behind you feel you are right now, we need to be patient because everyone's on their own path. For instance, right now you're feeling left behind because everyone else is passing you. But just like with Raj and my brother, if we just give ourselves the time required to learn and develop those skills, we're able to get ahead in our own way itself. So I know this is a difficult time for you, but the more we understand that we're on our own path itself, and it doesn't mean that if you're behind right now, you're forever left behind. There is a chance that anything can happen and you'll eventually find yourself in a much happier place. And when I was able to say it that way, it made her relate to the entire story a lot more. Even though the point I was making was relatively generic, everyone knows, oh, you should be patient and everyone's on their own path. But the context is what helped build the narrative in a slightly more unique manner itself. And that helped to ease out the entire conversation. So that's the CARE framework. Utilize it when you need to build stories and when you can't get to the point directly.
Now, understanding frameworks is all well and good, but if you don't practice them regularly, it's going to be difficult for our mind to adapt and hence utilize them in actual conversations. That's where this daily exercise will really come in handy. I used to do this all the time with my friend. We both were looking to get better at impromptu speaking. Now, this exercise does require a buddy, and it only takes about 5 minutes a day. The way you want to do this is you want to find somebody who's willing to give you 5 minutes of their time. It's okay if they don't want to practice the same thing. If they do, it's a bonus. If not, completely fine as well. Here's how it works. You need to set aside a time each day, or once a week, or 3 times a week. You can decide the frequency, and you want to ensure that there's a 5-minute timer on the call. Now, when you call the person up, you want to ask that person to give you a random topic. If anyone's at a loss of what topics to give, just go on ChatGPT, say, hey, give me a speech topic with a time limit of 1 minute on dash industry or on blank industry, and just fill in whatever industry you're most interested in speaking about. Once you're given the topic, the friend needs to start a timer of 1 minute. You need to speak on it, and you want to try to apply the CARE framework. Once you're done speaking, the friend then has to give you feedback on how effectively you were able to utilize the framework, how quickly you were able to think, and how good was your overall narration. If your friend is interested in practicing this as well, you give them a topic they need to speak using this framework as well, and then you provide them with feedback. The reason we set that 5-minute timer at the beginning is because this whole activity will take about 4 minutes, 1 minute for you to speak, 1 minute to get feedback. And if your friend is doing it, it'll take the same amount of time. And you want to keep this phone call just for this purpose itself. Don't get into casual conversations, talking about each other's day and catching up on random stuff. The way you can develop this habit is by keeping it just up to 5 minutes. So even if you're tired at the end of the day, if this call is scheduled, it'll be a lot easier for you to get through with it, given that the time factor is much lower. But if you want more frameworks to practice when you're doing this exercise, we have an entire video with multiple mental models that you should highly check out right here.